Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, I guess now, for some of us. Thank you for joining our parent webinar on feeding and Down syndrome, the do's and don'ts at mealtime, with our presenter, Vanessa Anderson-Smith. And we are excited. We have a good crowd joining us on the webinar right now. And just a show of hands, if you look beside your name, you'll see a little hand icon. I just want to make sure everybody can see and hear both my webcam, my screen, and hear me. Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so we have about an hour to go over some information for you, and I also have these are some logistics, just a brief overview to help people with the webinar and a little information about TalkTools, so I'm going to get into that, and once I finish that, we will change the presenter over to Vanessa, and she'll get into her presentation. Again, thanks for joining us. Okay. So this is just a brief welcome from our President, Luke Blessinger, thanking you for attending this webinar. We are launching free parent webinars. This is our second one, and we hope to be doing many more. And as part of this, we're going to have some feedback that we would like for you guys to provide us, so that we can give you information and materials that are relevant to your situation, to your life, and what you're going through as a parent, and how we can maybe help with that. So if you can provide some feedback for us, that would be terrific. We'll be sending out an email once this webinar is completed, and that is where you can help us with planning these webinars in the future. And this is our mission in a nutshell: improving the quality of life for those with disabilities. And the numbers. These are just how we get to our mission. And you can see here, I'm not going to read that. We are worldwide. We've been doing this therapy and training and technique for several decades now. And our goal this year is to reach 100,000 children, and we are on track to meet that goal, which is really exciting. So today's webinar, as you know, because you signed up for it, is feeding and Down syndrome, some do's and don'ts at mealtime. And this is what was on the website. I'll let y'all read this for a second. And our presenter is Vanessa Anderson-Smith. This is one of her first parent webinars for us, and we're really excited. And she's actually a level 4 certified TalkTools accomplished therapist. It says level 3 in there. Okay, so we're going to get into a little bit of logistics for this webinar. As we tested, and you can see and hear the presentation, and you can see my webcam, which is great. And this is kind of what the setup is. You can see my webcam at the bottom and the presentation up there at the top, and there's an activity panel there on the right. And you can toggle back and forth between the webcam and the presentation. There are some arrows up in this, I think it's in the upper right of the webcam, and that can help you enlarge and expand that webcam. If Vanessa might be doing some demo or something like that you want to see a little clearer, you can just go back and forth with that between the slides and the webcam. So that participant activity panel, everyone's muted because we do have a pretty big crowd up, on this webinar. So everyone is muted, but there are ways to interact with the presenter and the audience. So we have a couple of polls that we're going to do here. We're going to share that in just a minute. Quick polls, one question, just to get a gauge of who's on the webinar and what you're looking for with this webinar. and then a question pane, and that is, I'm going to go over that in a second. And then there is the handout section that you can download the workbook that accompanies these slides, and that's yours. So again, like we said, you can use that question pane to put any questions in, and I'll keep monitoring them as Vanessa goes through her presentation. And then that raise hand, we already tested that, and that's something, if you do have a question, you can do that as well, and it'll alert me that you do have a question. And we're going to just be banking these questions and going over them a couple of times during breaks and also toward the end. And then again, the polls are something that we're trying with this group, and I'm going to share one or two of them in just a minute, and you can decide, you know, how that goes and if that's something we want to do as well for future webinars. So to thank you for joining us, we do have a special discount code for parents on our website, and you'll be seeing that code in an email as well. And that is, you can scribble that down right now. You got 20% off and free shipping today, and then 20% off through next week for any tools that might be relevant. I think we put in the webinar pre-email that we have a parent kit, and we have a couple of other things that might be really helpful. Some of our feeding tools might be helpful as well. And that is it for me. I'm just going to look real quick to see if we have any questions over here right now. And I'm going to share, I don't see anything right now. Okay, good. So I'm going to share these polls before we get into the presentation. And they're, like I said, they're quick. They're one question. And for example, the first one is, are you a parent of a child with Down syndrome? Or are you an SLP or speech therapist? So I'm going to launch those polls. I think I did. This is something new that we haven't done before, so. Okay. All right, so I launched the first one, and if you have, you can see on your activity panel the poll section if you want to just quick do a yes, no. If you are a parent, that helps us with, again, like the content and material that we want to provide for our parents for future webinars. And I'm just going to keep this running for a minute or two and see if I have a question. Hang on a minute. Okay. Like I said, this is new. Let me see what I need to do here. Launch. Okay. I think I got it now. All right. Starting. All right, I'm going to start another poll here. In just 1 second. We're almost done with this one. is it? And I'm going to do the second one. Okay, so we've got a couple more similar things, just one question. We'll put those out there toward the middle of the webinar, and I want to get right into Vanessa's presentation. So again, thank you very much for joining us, and I'll make an announcement midway for a couple of those other polls, and I'll be checking the questions as well.
Mary, do you want to give me the go-ahead?
You are good. We see your slides, and just a quick show of hands from our folks here on the webinar if you can see Vanessa, and you can see her slides. It'll hand. Yep. Okay, we're getting the thumbs up or the hands up. So we're ready to go. I'm going to stop sharing my webcam and mute myself, and the floor is yours, Vanessa.
Okay, thanks. All right, well, I just want to thank everyone for attending, and I want to thank TalkTools for asking me to do this as well. It's a big honor to be able to have the platform to talk about Down syndrome and feeding with this audience. A couple disclosures just to get out of the way. I don't have any relevant financial or non-financial relationships to disclose, and I'm not employed by TalkTools, nor do I receive any financial compensation from TalkTools or any other company. I'm just going to discuss general feeding and Down syndrome and just give an overview of TalkTools and oral placement therapy for parents. There's not going to be any teaching techniques or any training provided for anyone participating. Basically, I'm just a speech therapist that's dedicated the last 4 years of my career and what I feel like is my life to figuring out feeding therapy, and specifically with the Down syndrome population. That's a big population that we work with. We'll just get into this quickly, you know, who we are and what we do. My name's Vanessa Anderson Smith, and I own a speech therapy private practice in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And I am TalkTools Level 4 trained, as Mary said. I have advanced training in prompt and SOS as well. About 4 years ago, I was working in skilled nursing facilities. I did that for the first 3 years out of my graduate program. And there was a lot of changes on the horizon within the company and within the industry as a whole. So within a matter of 2 days, I decided to quit my full-time job, my steady full-time job with benefits, and I wanted to work with pediatrics. The birth to 5 population was something that I was always really passionate about, and feeding therapy and swallowing disorders, that was my true passion. So I quit my job in a matter of a couple days. I worked for a school district part-time, and I saw a few kiddos through our early intervention program in South Dakota, just as an independent contractor, going to homes and doing some therapy. And a month into my career change, I had the chance to take the intro course, the 3-part oral placement therapy course through TalkTools in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And you know, I didn't have a lot of money, and I didn't have a lot of time off. It was a brand new job that I took, but I'm so glad that I made it work and I went to this course, because it changed my life, it changed my career, and it changed the lives of so many of the kids that I've worked with. So that year I just took as many continuing eds as I could get my hands on, and by the end of that school year I was able to be full-time working with as an independent contractor with the state of South Dakota for early intervention. That was my biggest, craziest dream. I never thought that it would turn into what it did, but there's just a really big need in my area. So the business that I started out of my car with $30 worth of used toys has now turned into a fully functioning speech therapy private practice, and we have a clinic set up now. I have 2 employees that are working for me. Kelly is on the end of that picture. Kelly Krieger, she is my full-time speech therapist, and she's TalkTools Level 2 trained. She dove right in, and she's been such a blessing to me and a huge blessing to all the kids that she works with. She's an amazing therapist and really has a knack for this. In the middle of the picture is Anna Johnson. She is my office manager and actually was my friend for many, many years before I needed someone type A to come in and help me with billing and the day-to-day of everything. And she started out doing that. And she also does have her master's in special education. So she has been a wealth of knowledge to us, helping us problem solve through behaviors and sensory issues with a lot of the kids that we work with. So like I said, our private practice, we are 100% oral motor speech and feeding. We don't do any other kind of therapy, so we really get to just focus on what we love and practice our oral motor skills and our techniques every single day. An overview of what we're going to be doing today is we're going to talk about specifically children with Down syndrome, and you know, why are they at a higher rate of having a feeding disorder, and what's contributing to that, and how can we help it. What a lot of people don't realize is that feeding and Down syndrome is what really sets up speech clarity down the road. So I'm going to also talk about a few techniques that we use and what those have to do with speech production. So if we can get the solid foundation of feeding for these kiddos early on, it's just going to help their speech so much more down the road. On the other hand, it's never too late to start. So we talk about how we can remediate some of the issues that maybe have already reared their heads a little bit. So talking about feeding disorders, when people ask me what I do for a living, I basically say I help babies learn to eat and learn to talk. A lot of people say, no, what do you mean? How does your child not know how to eat? Or how does a child not know how to eat? And how would you teach a child? And specifically children with Down syndrome, they have sensory, tone, and structure issues that are really going to impact feeding. Sensory-wise, they're not integrating the sensations the way you and I might be integrating it. They might be overreactive sensory-wise, and those are the kids that I call, someday they could, you know, maybe be a very good wine connoisseur because you switch up one little flavor and you can see it in their eyes and they know. They're very sensitive to, you know, anything in their mouth, that, you know, the way it feels in their mouth. But there's also the other side, which is the underreactive sensory system, which is, for me personally, probably about 80% of the kids with Down syndrome that I work with. They're mouthing objects a lot. They need extra input. What I usually say is those are my Novocaine mouth kids. You imagine going to the dentist and coming out and you've had some Novocaine. You are not going to probably talk very well. You're not going to eat well. You might bite your tongue. You might bite your cheek. You might spill water out of your mouth. A lot of times that's how some of these kids are walking around every day. So it's no wonder that they're having some of the issues with eating and speaking that they are. There are some structure deficits and differences in children with Down syndrome. Tethered oral tissues, tongue tie, that's something that we're really starting to look at a lot more in the last couple of years, and how that can impact feeding, especially bottle feeding and breastfeeding. And with that comes a high and narrow palate a lot of times, just because of how the palate's going to form around the tongue. And if the tongue is anchored down, we might have a high narrow palate. I have kids that get a lot of food stuck up in the palate. The kids can't get their tongue to reach the palate as well because it's so high. So those are just some of the structural things that go on. In addition to, children with Down syndrome have an underdeveloped jaw a lot of times, especially if they're not getting this therapy right away. And their mouth is just going to be a little bit smaller. In addition, there's some medical complexities such as cardiac issues, which is really going to impact endurance. And that's endurance with whether it's bottling, breastfeeding, or eating just a meal. Sometimes these kids, it just takes everything out of them, and smaller, more frequent meals throughout the day might be a good option until we can get that endurance increased. Small nasal canals as well. A lot of these kids, they have tiny little noses, and they have tiny little nasal canals and a lot of congestion. And especially in my area, I feel like I'm wiping noses all day, every day. I don't know if we have a lot of allergies and ragweed, and then we have cold and flu season coming. So really small nasal canals and then increased amount of congestion. That is going to be really tricky for some kids. If you're congested and you're trying to coordinate the breathing and the swallowing and the chewing, it can just lead to some issues that we have to work with. Acid reflux is a huge one with this population. Children with Down syndrome, they have low tone. They have low tone in their hands, they have low tone in their legs and their core, and that means that they're going to have low tone in any kind of muscle, so that the sphincter that is between the stomach and the esophagus that closes off, that might not get good closure because of low tone issues, so then more acid comes up. Personally, I've had some kids that have had such severe acid reflux, and we just don't get anywhere in feeding and eating until we get that under control. These kids are smart, and they know, I just ate something and I feel really bad afterwards, so I don't want to eat again. So it's something that we have to work really closely with GI on. The last one is constipation. Once again, we have low muscle tone in our colon as well. And if nothing's coming out, kids are not going to want to put anything in. So I know that that's an issue that a lot of the parents of kiddos that I work with are trying to just maintain on a daily basis. So that's a little bit about feeding. Now let's talk about some speech intelligibility. The two big things that we're seeing in children with Down syndrome are motor planning issues. So this is just a breakdown in the pathway between the brain and the muscles. They know what they want to say. They have a really high receptive language. They can't get it out. Or if they do get it out, it's not coming out in the right way. You know, if my brain says, you need to say the word mom, well, my brain is telling my lips to form together for the M sound, then open up my jaw, ah, and then go back to the M sound, mm. So my brain can do that, but a lot of these kids, their brain can't. There's a breakdown in that pathway. So that is a big issue that we work with, in addition to dysarthria, which is the low muscle tone and weakness. And that is, like, again, you know, low tone is such a big thing with the Down syndrome population. And if they have low tone in their hands and in their legs, then we're going to have low tone in the tongue and the jaw and the lips and in the cheeks. And that is just not going to allow the child to hit those articulatory targets crisply and efficiently. Like, you know, it's going to be a lot less graded movements. And that also plays into some respiratory things as well. So a lot of these kiddos are very shallow breathers, and their volume is down because they just don't have the abdominal grading that they need with the core and the trunk support. And what we're finding a lot is, while yes, children with Down syndrome do have articulation issues, I haven't run into one that doesn't. They also have really poor volume. And even if the child is having speech intelligibility issues, if they can speak louder, that's just going to help the listener to understand even more. And even if they can't quite understand what the child is saying, if the volume is increased, it's just going to help a lot more. So that's also a component. Our kiddos that have Down syndrome that are coming into our clinic, they are not just dysarthria or just motor planning, they are both. And once you recognize that they can co-occur and you just start treating them both, it helps a lot, and we see a lot more progress when we look at both ends of it. If you want any more information on what those are, I listed the ASHA website. ASHA is the governing body for speech therapists in the United States, and there's some more information on there. Okay, let's talk about feeding therapy. So there is, if you take Lori Overland's course, A Sensory Motor Approach to Feeding, or the book that she wrote with Robin Merkel Walsh, this book here. This is my Bible, and it is out all the time. It's such a good book, and there's a wealth of knowledge. If you go to that course, she's gonna explain in depth the relationship between feeding and speech, and that we're not gonna be able to separate them. However, it is not a one-to-one ratio, one-to-one relationship, but they're very closely intertwined, because how we use our muscles for eating is how we're gonna use them for speech. One example that I use a lot of times is children with Down syndrome. When people stereotypically think about a child with Down syndrome, they think about their tongue being out. So a low forward tongue posture like this. And that is because we don't have any tongue-based retraction. And the tongue is just out a lot. And when a child eats, the tongue is out. When they swallow, there could be what we call a tongue thrust or a reverse swallow. They're going to seal off the oral cavity by sticking their tongue out and swallowing. I'm really fortunate to partner with a dentist that does a lot of myofunctional therapy, looks at the palate, all those things. And she was telling me that on average, people swallow 700 to 800 times a day. So if a child is thrusting their tongue out all day, that many times a day, we are just ingraining that motor pattern and that forward tongue placement. And we need tongue-based retraction for every single sound that we produce except for the TH sound. So it's of the utmost importance for the clarity of these of the speech for these kiddos that we start looking at feeding right away, and hopefully we can prevent a lot of issues down the road. But also we work with children, well, they're not children, they're adults that are 20 and 22 years old, and we're just starting to do therapy, working on their tongue thrust, and we're seeing good results too. So it's never too late. We are going to use feeding and oral motor, oral placement therapy exercises in conjunction with traditional speech therapy. What we do will, yes.
I didn't want to interrupt you, but we do have a couple of questions, and
Okay.
we finished the poll, I did 2 questions, and I've got 2 more. I don't know if you want to know what the results of the polls were, and then we can go to the questions. So my question was about if you're a parent, and we've got 47% are parents, 53 are SLPs or speech therapists on this call, on the webinar. So kind of interesting. But that's something, for everybody to have as we move through the webinar. And so we've got a couple of questions. Hang on a minute, let me pull this up. This is from Maria. Hi, after eating, when I brush my daughter's mouth, age 4, I see my daughter always has some leftover food in her mouth. Any tips to help her clean her mouth through swallowing first? And then also when drinking water while eating, some of the food in her mouth ends up in the water, and she's not able to control that food remains in her mouth when she drinks.
Okay. First, what I would recommend if this was a kiddo that was coming into my clinic, what I would do right away is I think that there's a good chance that there might be some food in the mouth still because she can't feel it, what's in her mouth. So we're going to get into a pre-feeding program and the sensory input, and doing that before a meal could really help with that. And also, encouraging drinking in between bites and things like that to help wash it down. Looking at the tongue movement exercises so that she can move the food back more so. And with the food going back into the cup or into the straw, I would say that is a combination of probably, obviously there's food still in there, and that there's some motor planning issues going if she might be spitting some of the liquid back into the straw. Those are things that it would be good to have each language pathologist look at.
One more question, and then we'll get back to your presentation. This is from Elaine. Is there anything we can do exercise-wise to increase volume of our child when he speaks?
Yeah, definitely. I use the TalkTools horn hierarchy all the time for these kids, just to teach that breath control and the abdominal grading. Once we get through the horn hierarchy a little bit too, if we have to really hit volume, using kazoos helps. And also TalkTools makes duration tubes too. And what those are is, I don't think I have any right here, but it's a long tube that you can stretch out. You can make it smaller or you can make it bigger, and there's a ball in it, and the child has to blow the ball the length to try and get it out of the tube. So that works on just increasing the airflow.
And I'm going to share a couple of those tools, the links to those tools you're referencing that are on the website for people to see too. So
great.
So we, oh yeah, and somebody asked about the feeding therapy book, and I'll put that link on there as well.
Great.
So we're good.
All right. Those are great questions. Thanks, everyone. Just to finish up on this slide, we were not going to replace traditional speech therapy with what we're doing here with feeding and with oral placement therapy. But what I'm finding is if kids come to our clinic and we're really doing a lot of oral placement therapy and feeding exercises, it's allowing the child to participate in traditional speech therapy a lot better. Kiddos with Down syndrome, I did not like working with articulation before. With kiddos with Down syndrome or DeGeorge syndrome, any kind of tone issues, because I would say, look at me, now say va, and it would come out ba. I'm like, oh, but put your teeth here. And I mean, those were cues that they couldn't follow because they couldn't bring their lip in, So if we can work on that motor control in private practice, and then when the child goes to school and gets their traditional speech therapy, and we do traditional speech therapy too, we incorporate everything in, but it's just going to allow them the motor control to participate a little bit better and be more successful. We're going to take a peek at some feeding concepts now. We are going to discuss positioning for eating, a pre-feeding program. So for the question that I got about having food in the mouth, this will hopefully give you some more information on what to look for. Straw drinking, spoon feeding, and chewing. Before we get into that though, let's talk about therapy. So when should you start? Say you have a prenatal diagnosis of a child has a prenatal diagnosis of Down syndrome, starting right away, and I'm not saying that you need to do 45 minutes of therapy with a newborn baby every week, but just getting to see a speech language pathologist, doing some stretches and getting the oral cavity kind of primed up. Also looking at bottling and how to make sure that eating is a good experience right away so that we don't have any aversions. With that being said, it is never too late. Like I said, we work with adults that are 22, 23 years old, And they never had this approach until a few years ago when we started with them. And we're seeing some really good results. Now, that's not to say that we don't have a long ways to go, because we do, but it's nice to know that it's never too late to start. So I always encourage parents to incorporate some of these concepts into their everyday life. So, and I don't ever want parents to feel overwhelmed because you have enough to do as a parent. But if you could spend literally 5 minutes before a meal, do a pre-feeding program, a sensory input program, and then do some chewy tubes, help them place the food on the back molars, and then, you know, that can make a big difference down the road if you're doing it 5 times a week, you know, for 5 minutes. For speech, you know, blowing bubbles, blowing horns, doing that in the bathtub quick, you know, having fun with it. I don't want any parent to ever overdo it. And if you call my clinic and you say, I want therapy 5 times a week for my child, like, that's not something that I do on a consistent basis. If we did an intensive program, that was fine. But we don't ever want to overdo therapy. These kids are going to be in therapy for years and years to come, so we don't want to burden them out. And we just want kids to be kids. That is just as important as being in therapy. All right, so positioning here. This is essential for effective therapy and for efficient eating. If a child can't hold themselves up in the chair because they don't have good core strength, I mean, all they're going to be able to think about during the meal is, how am I going to not fall out of my chair? And that's going to come before thinking, you know, where's my tongue going when I am swallowing? And first things first, we got to get them in a good position. And the chair needs to be adjustable and have a footrest for grounding. If you think about going to a restaurant and sitting at the bar or on a high top table, and if those stools don't have a footrest, that would be so uncomfortable to try and eat a meal. You know, you want a place to put your feet. So I have a couple pictures here of the chairs that I really like. This is the TalkTools therapy chair, which is amazing. It provides so much support for these kids, and it grows with them. I like that one a lot. And this is the Abby Beyond Y chair. This is one that we have in our clinic right now, and a lot of the parents of kids that we work with, they have ordered these at home as well, because it has the adjustable foot pedal. You can adjust the seat. It can hold, I think, up to 200 pounds. So as kids get older, you can just take the tray off and you can slide it right up to the table during meal so that they can sit at the table with you, but they can still have good support. The rule of thumb is 90, 90, 90. We want the ankles at 90 degrees, the hips at 90 degrees, the knees at 90 degrees. That's just going to kind of get everything centered, and then we can start working on those fine little motor movements of, say, moving your tongue to your molar. So those are my favorite chairs. Let's talk a little bit about a pre-feeding program. So in Lori and Robin's book, again, there's so many exercises in there, and if you can go to Lori's class, it will help you to really understand these concepts too. But what they write about is, you know, the goal of a sensory motor program or a pre-feeding program is to develop the motor skills to support safe, effective, and nutritive feeding. First, I'm going to talk a little bit about sensory. If, you know, let's talk about those kids that are minority. Yeah.
Vanessa, I got a question.
Okay.
About the feeding and all that.
Okay.
Hang on a minute. Okay, so Arena, my son is 4. He does not sit up yet. What is the right? He is not. My son is 1. Did I say that? He does not sit up yet. What is the right position while feeding?
That, you know, I assume and I hope that physical therapy is involved with that too. It's kind of hard to say without seeing him, but when I've had a physical therapist that I work with, what we'll do is we can get a child in a high chair or something like that, and sometimes we have to stuff pillows or towels around them just to get them a little bit more stable. And, I think that there's a lot of high chairs out there on the market, and they're not good for kids that have tone and posture issues. So investing in a good high chair like the TalkTools one, or like the Abby Beyond Wide chair. There's also another one called the Kikaroo, the Trip Trap. Those are things that, especially if you work with a physical therapist, they could recommend some good seating and some options to go with.
Okay, and then I got two more. I am starting first feeding, this is Yvette. I am starting first feeding with my almost 6-month-old tomorrow. What should she sit in? She does not sit up yet on her own. Should I use a tilted high chair seat?
Well, and what you'll want to make sure that she has some good head control before you start with feeding. So that's always comes first with spoon, if she's going to do spoon feeding. And it's not necessarily, what should I put them in, but it's how do they look when they're in this position. So as long as that there's some good support, and that she's not all over the place and wavering, it might just be something that you'll have to problem solve and, have towels ready, rolled up, pillows, things like that.
And we got one more from Jen. Hi, my daughter is 1 year old, has to have honey thickened liquids because of her risk to aspirate. What is the best way to control constipation, and what tools do you suggest to reduce tongue thrust?
Oh, did you say it was about constipation too? Was that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you want me to read it again?
No, that's fine. I just want to make sure that I heard that right. With constipation, it's drinking a lot of water, and which is hard when, just getting a lot of fluids in is going to be important. And there is, I can't remember what it's called, but I believe there's some things on the market that you can use besides your standard Miralax. I can't think of it off the top of my head, but it's something similar to what you can even do is get some dates or some prunes and puree them, and then spread them on toast or put them in and they're sweet, so kids like that, and put them in, yogurt or baby food, something like that. So those are good starting points, and then of course always talking to your GI doctor about that. Mary, what was the other part of the question besides the constipation?
Let's see, what tools do you suggest? What tools do you suggest to reduce tongue thrust?
Tongue thrust, the ultimate, well, we always want to work the jaw, and we'll get into that a little bit with chewing, but if the jaw is strong and stable, then we're going to have a lot more control over the tongue. So chewy tubes, which we're going to be getting into at the end of the session, more towards the end, and of course straw drinking is going to be huge, and we're going to have a section on that as well.
Okay.
Okay.
I think we're good. Wait a minute. Let me check real quick.
Okay.
So this is just a comment from Laura. Have her talk to her GI for those recommendations as well.
Yep.
And then Neil we use Movicol, I think that's how you say it, for constipation. It works really well. So just another recommendation.
Great.
Okay, we're good.
Okay. Getting back to the pre-feeding, we were talking a little bit about sensory, and my Novocaine mouth kids. If we can get in with various tools and kind of it wakes up the sensory system, and kids can actually feel what's in their mouth, and they can feel their tongue, and they can feel their cheeks. So from a sensory aspect, that will help a lot for the kids to be able to feel what's going on in their mouth. So there's a Z-Vibe that we use. This is the round tip, and you can turn it on and it vibrates. There's different tips you can see on there. The Mickey Mouse ears. There's a fine tip one. And if you take any courses on the feeding aspects, you'll know what to do with these various tips. You can also use a toothette, which is just a sponge on the end. It just depends on what a child needs for input. Sometimes I've had a child that was such a sensory seeker. Oh my gosh, she needed vibration in her mouth, and she couldn't get enough of it, so we would use the Z-Vibe and it'd be turned on. And a couple months later, I could tell that her mom was really following through with this pre-feeding program, because a couple months later, the vibration became far too much. So we were able to change her sensory system, so it's not something that you'll necessarily have to do before every meal for the rest of the child's life. In addition, by doing some of these things, we look at the different kind of pre-feeding exercises we can do, which is like a chewy tube. We can have them practice chewing on something that isn't food. So for our kids that are really overreactive sensory-wise, they don't know how to chew food. And then if I put something really flavorful in their mouth, that's just going to be sensory overload. So we can practice with these, and it's a lot safer than, say, putting a piece of food in a child's mouth, because then you are always, running the risk of aspiration. So, like I said, Lori's course is really good, and the book that Lori and Robin wrote is really good for understanding that. I have a video example here of me doing a pre-feeding program with Renner. Renner is, at the time of this video, I think he was 4 years old, but he has Down syndrome. And when I first started seeing him, he was the very first child with Down syndrome that I ever used TalkTools with, and bless his heart, because we learned a lot together. He's been through it all with me, and when I first started seeing him, his tongue was out all the time, and he wanted to eat so bad, and every time that his parents would try and feed him, it would come right back out, because he couldn't get his tongue in his mouth and moving it around. And I think that you'll be surprised to see how he's moving his tongue in this video. 1, 2, 3, 4. Good work. Can you do a kiss? Okay. You want to pause it quick? So that is Renner that we were using. Z-Vibe with the yellow tip turned on. He is a sensory seeker, so he really needs that input. Here is an example of doing just some tongue lateralization exercises with Renner to get him to be able to move his tongue around. And I'm using the blue square tip for this one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Good work moving your tongue. Okay. So that is Renner.
Hey, Vanessa, we got a couple more questions.
Okay.
In the pre-feeding goals, what's the pink thing like a lollipop, and what does it do? This is from Sarah. I think it's the.
I think she's referring to the toothette. It's the same. It's just a different kind of input as the Z-Vibe would be, or even as the Nook brush. Also with little babies, sometimes I'll just use my pinky, a gloved finger, and use my pinky. It just depends, once your child gets evaluated by a speech therapist and a feeding therapist, you can see that sometimes kids respond better to this sensory-wise. Are we getting the right motor movement, or do we need to add in something a little bit more like a Z-Vibe?
And then this is Sarah as well. She's asking about the Mickey Mouse. I guess she's not familiar with that particular component.
That is just a tip that you can get on, I don't have mine right now, but you can put on the Z-Vibe, and in Lori's book and in the course, they detail a lot of how you can use that to get lip closure, and you can work on lip closure with the Mickey Mouse before you go into spoon feeding or cup drinking. So there's different protocols that you can use with it.
Christina is, how do you know if your child may benefit from these pre-feeding sensory exercises? I have a 16-month-old who is beginning to self-feed with her palm.
Okay.
And yeah.
It's a little hard for me to say because I haven't seen her, but I do know that in my experience, even when parents come into my clinic for an evaluation and I say, how's their eating? And like, oh, they're a great eater. They're a great eater. And so they're taking in a good amount and they're fairly safe and efficient. But then when I look and I might see some disorganized movements, So in my experience, I've never had a child with Down syndrome that doesn't need a pre-feeding program for my specific goals that we're looking at in therapy. So I think trying to find a good feeding therapist, they would help you to understand that a little bit more.
And then Amanda's just curious that this will help with the drooling since they will be more aware, sensory aware.
Yeah, that's definitely a component that's going to help. They're going to be able to have more sensory awareness in their mouth. And also with kids with Down syndrome, the low tone in the jaw, if the mouth is always open like that because they have the low tone, then, drool is going to come out more. And so working with the chewy tube hierarchy, getting the jaw strong will be also a good component for that.
This is Fernanda. My son will be 19 months tomorrow, and we are not having much luck transitioning all liquids through a straw. If I put anything other than water in the cup, he spits it out once it hits his mouth. Also, it's hard for him to keep all liquids in his mouth.
Okay, that sounds, and it sounds like that there's some sensory issues going on there as well. Sensory is the basis of everything for everyone, and people don't even realize it. Even me sitting here, I know where my body is in space, and I'm able to tune out some of the cars that are driving by. So, and that's just different parts of sensory, but oral sensory as well, that's going to be a main component. So finding a good speech therapist or feeding therapist to kind of help you through those things, and doing probably some behavior modification too to try and desensitize the child to trying new things.
Okay, I got a couple more questions. Could these exercises be done after eating? This is Elaine. And then Amanda just wants to know how quickly she could see results, working with a professional.
I think that we want to do it before eating, just so that we can prime up the oral system and we can give a lot more input. But going in after eating too and trying to help clean out the mouth, that's not a bad idea, but for sure I would want to do it before. And then as far as the results go, it's hard to say. Every child is so different. But I've had some kids where they've come in to the clinic twice a week for a year before we really get going with them wanting to put food in their mouth and doing really well. I have other kids that, for instance, another speech therapist said this little boy's never going to chew. He's never going to eat. They came into my clinic. They wanted a second opinion, and we started to do oral placement therapy, chewy tube work, all that stuff. And within 5 months, he graduated from the feeding clinic that he was going to on a consultative basis because it was the missing link for him. That's a best case scenario, obviously, but it's just going to depend on everyone. So.
Alrighty, I think we're good for now.
Okay.
Great, thanks.
Next, what we're going to talk about is straw drinking and why is that important. We want to wean off the bottle and into a straw or an open cup as soon as possible. So, usually around that year mark. However, we have to use common sense. Never ever sacrifice hydration or nutrition just so that you can get a child off of a bottle. So that's something that you'll want to work with if there are hydration, nutrition issues, working with GI, working with your primary doctor and a dietitian. But the purpose of why we like to use straw drinking and especially straw drinking, we get a lot of tongue-based retraction. And like I said earlier, we need tongue-based retraction for every single sound except for the TH. So that's going to really help speech down the road too. When we teach straw drinking, we're working on lip rounding, so getting their lips round, lip protrusion, so getting them out, and then tongue retraction, among other things like jaw stability. All of those things are good components for a solid O sound, an oo sound as in boot, and the W sound as in wet. So all of those, if you think about when you drink from a straw like this, and your tongue is back, and your lips are protruded and rounded, and then you say oh, and it's very similar motor movements. I have a video to show. This is a little Lincoln. I think at the time of this video, he was maybe 14 months, 15 months. We actually caught, this was the first time he ever drank out of the honey bear, that we were able to catch it on video, which was really cool. Shortly thereafter, within a few weeks or a month, Lincoln started to do a lot more lip rounding sounds, which was neat to see. So here is little Lincoln. We're using the honey bear. Gotta swallow. Got a lot in your mouth. Therapy's messy. We were using the honey bear with him, and this is TalkTools sells it as well. It's good. It teaches kids how to suck from a straw because you can squeeze it, and then it draws the liquid up. And once kids go into the drinking, then they get the suckle pattern going to be able to drink themselves. So we use this before we go into the straw hierarchy. Do we have any questions on straw drinking? Not yet. Okay.
Let me look real quick.
Okay.
Yeah, we do.
Okay.
And I want to tell you that it's almost 1 o'clock.
Okay.
And I was going to do a quick just check to see if any people want to, I'm sure they will, want to stay on a few more minutes. So just everybody raise your hands. You can always, leave if you need to. But if you want to stay on for a few more minutes, I think Vanessa's available, I hope, now that I said that.
Yep.
Yeah, we're good. People want to stay on.
Okay.
So this is from Christina. Let's see. Thanks. We're doing well with straw drinking and have transitioned from honey bear to other straw cups with handles to promote self-feeding. But most either leak or have straws that are too short. Do you have any recommendations for straw cups that are long enough with handles?
There is one that I think it's the Munchkin brand, and it's a weighted straw at the bottom, and then there's handles on the side. I don't have one here with me, but I know a lot of my kids use that. And what I did with that was the straws were too long, and the kids were putting the straws way too far into their mouths, and biting it like that instead of doing this. So we just cut the straws, and it was a better option because I know that it's spilling. We want to have things that are convenient but that are also good for oral motor development. So that was a good compromise for us. Sippy cups are something that we definitely want to stay away from, especially in children with Down syndrome, because they're promoting a forward and down tongue placement. But we have to be realistic too. So that's what I like. I like that Munchkin cup.
And a couple of people, I'm not going to read specifics, but they're talking about the longer straw works well for them as as an option. So just more of a comment than a question.
Great.
And I have a couple of other people who need to get off, and we will have this available recorded. We are recording it, so we will send that link to everyone who needs to leave or wants to recap some of the great stuff that Vanessa's been discussing. So back to you.
All right. Let's talk a little bit about spoon feeding and why we want to do that. This is typically the first introduction of a solid food, and the spoon feeding works on jaw stability, tongue retraction, which is a very common theme, as you can see, and lip closure. And again, those are all things that we need to make good M, B, and P sounds, which are usually a lot of times the first developing sounds. This is detailed again in a different, let's see, well known the sensory motor approach to feeding, and Sarah Rosenfeld Johnson, who started TalkTools, obviously has done a lot of research on this too. So looking up some of her articles on the TalkTools site will be really helpful if you want to look into it more. I do have a video. This is of Leighton. I think Leighton's mom is watching. So we've been working with him since I think he was 4 months old. Kelly actually sees him, and what she's doing is a side spoon placement that is once again detailed in Lori's course and in Lori and Robin's book. This is just a therapeutic technique, and this isn't something that you're going to feed your child in all the time this way, but you're going to notice that she's placing it sideways like this to try and get good lip closure. So here is a video.
Good job, buddy.
Okay.
Nice job, bud.
So that is Leighton. He is throwing his head back a little bit, which that's why it's so good we record a lot of sessions, because it's things like that that we don't normally see. So maybe giving him a little bit of head support would have been good, but it was a great video to kind of showcase what spoon feeding can do. Do we have any questions on spoon feeding?
Hey, look, this is, it's more general. I work with a girl presenting with Down syndrome. This is Nisha. She has an open mouth posture with tongue protruded forward and no dissociation between upper teeth and lower lip. Talking more about speech production than feeding.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, you know, targeting some jaw work is always a good thing that's going to help with that. So chewy tube is what we're going to look at next. And yeah, just kind of diving into the various TalkTools hierarchies to start working on all that muscle dissociation. All right. The last thing that we're going to talk about is chewing, which is very complex because we have a lot of different systems working at the same time. So we have the jaw that's moving up and down, chewing, the tongue, which has to move and keep the food onto the molars, and then the cheek to stabilize. So it's really complex, and we always want to use safety first, obviously.
Hey, Vanessa?
Yeah.
Before you get into chewing, we did actually get a couple more spoon questions, if you don't mind. Will side spoon feeding work with any baby spoon, or is there a specific spoon that you think would work better? This is from Yvette.
I find that the ones that have really deep bowls don't work as well with it, but as long as there's a fairly shallow bowl, this is a spoon that I have, then it works better. But I mean, you can use it with the deeper bowls. It might just be a little bit harder to get the food out of there for the child.
And then this is more of a comment and making sure this is Neil. Gently pushing down on the tongue with the spoon. Is that okay as a parent?
Is that okay, he's wondering? Or
yeah, is that okay to do that?
You know, I'll tap the child's tongue to get them to retract it. If we're pushing it at all, we can kind of reinforce that forward. So what I'll do is if the tongue is out like that, I'll just tap to give some awareness to get it in. Providing jaw support during this is going to help. So if the jaw is supported by you can see how Kelly did it in that video, then we're going to have, the child's going to have a lot more control over the tongue, and hopefully we'll see a little bit more retraction. But even with Leighton, you can see that he's still tongue thrusting, and it's just something that we will continue to work through in therapy.
That's it for now.
Okay. So back to chewing, you know, we're talking safety first, and that's why I love working with the chewy tubes, because we don't have to risk, you know, a child having food in their mouth and then they don't know what to do with it, and we don't have to risk the choking when we have this and it's controlled. So we use the chewy tubes to start to teach the skill before giving them the food, or when a child is eating and we just want to refine that chewing pattern, practicing the chewy tubes like that, put it in the mouth, and then going right into feeding. This is, you can see this picture, this is of Renner when Renner was little, and like I said, he wanted to eat so bad and all the food would just come right out, and he was, you know, around a year old when he wanted to eat, and it was a real struggle. And I am happy to report now he's 4 years old and his favorite food is chips and salsa at the local Mexican restaurant. So, and he does very well with them. I've been there with him before and he chews them very well and very safely. So it's possible to make a lot of progress with this. This is a video of little Rebecca, who we see for therapy, and Rebecca is really good at chewing and everything, and I just wanted to take a recording of her because it's just such a good example of what working with the chewy tubes and the chewy tube hierarchy will do, which is outlined in various, I think that TalkTools, when they send the chewy tubes, Mary, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there's an insert in there that talks about how to use them, and then there's different hierarchies in the OPT book and in Lori's and Robin's book as well.
Yeah, there's some instructions and that sort of thing, but obviously you would want to have some guidance, professional guidance with that as well.
Yeah, you don't want to wing it because there's a method to the madness.
I mean, they seem like fun things, but there's like you said, there's an actual, you know.
There's a protocol that we follow with it. So here is Rebecca with a yellow chewy tube. And you sit up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Good work. High five. So that's Rebecca, who, you know, we've been seeing since she was about 8 months old, and her her tongue position and her jaw, she's just really good with it. You can tell that it was started really early with her. Any questions on chewing? Not yet.
Nope. We
Okay.
don't have anything. No.
All right. Okay, so those were the techniques that we just briefly touched on, the tip of the iceberg. I hope that it piques interest. Oh, yeah.
We did
Is
just
there?
get
Okay.
one. This is from Anita. What color tube for my 1-year-old?
You know, that's just going to really depend on how she's doing. And I know with TalkTools there is a hierarchy. We start with red, and then it goes to the yellow one that Rebecca had, and then we start to incorporate the grabbers as well. But that just depends, and that would be something that you'd want to have a speech therapist that has some training in it to evaluate. I know from my own experience, even though this is the first one, because it's supposed to be the easiest and they get harder, some kids, I do start with the yellow one because this is really big for their mouth. So welcome to gray area. There's not a really good answer for that. Sorry about that.
One more.
Okay.
So it's just basically what you were saying. Is it red, yellow, purple, green?
Yeah, that's how it goes. That's the hierarchy of how it goes.
Okay. Okay. Wait, one more. Let's see
Okay.
what this says. Let me undock. What foods do you suggest to start for chewing?
Soft meltables or crunchy meltables. Sorry about that. So those veggie sticks are really good because even though you know, it's crunchy and it gives some good sensory feedback, but then if it hangs out in the child's mouth a little too long, it melts down, and we don't have to worry as much about any kind of choking with it. So also, you know, any kind of the meltables, and then Cheerios and things like that. I like to start with more crunchy so kids have that sensory feedback. But like I said, this is gray area. Every child is different. Some kids do not like crunchy food, and we do more soft food. So cubes of cheeses, cooked carrots cubed up. Those are other things you can look at too.
Okay.
Okay. So you know, like I said, you know, I said that this is gray area, a lot of it, and you're going to really need to find a good, solid speech therapist that has a lot of background in feeding, or that has a big desire to learn about it. And this is something that it's taken me years to really wrap my mind around. And when I first started, I know that I wanted to know it all right away, and I didn't understand why I couldn't just figure it out all right away. But you know, it's just the process, and it's going to take a while to piece together. So we just have to embrace the journey. With parents, after I give this presentation to parents, I gave it at my local Down syndrome conference. I don't ever want a parent to walk away from this webinar or from any presentation feeling so overwhelmed and, oh my gosh, I'm so behind and I should have started this sooner. And I don't want anyone to feel that way, because it's never too late to start, and just incorporating a few techniques. So that is your journey with your child, and it's going to go the way that it's supposed to. So you're going to learn together, and you're going to learn with your child, and the child's going to learn with you. And I know I learned something from every single kid that I work with. So the learning just goes all around. I just want to conclude here with, once again, it's never too late. We can start working on coordinated fine oral motor movements during eating, which is going to help lead to increased speech clarity and, of course, quality of life overall. To be able to help a child do two of the most basic things that a human does, and especially that separates us from animals, and speaking and being able to talk about our feelings and having a social life and being able to go talk to friends, and eating. I mean, you think about any big celebration in life, eating is involved. So this is what I love most about doing it, because we can really have major positive impacts on a child and their whole family for the rest of their life by doing this. I like to always show this video, or this picture. This is Eman. Eman started working with me in July of 2015, and traditional speech therapy just wasn't that successful for her. She was still very quiet, didn't have a lot of words. She didn't have a lot of overt feeding issues, but she had things that we wanted to work on. After just 2 months of therapy, she has so much more oral muscle, not tone, but definition. And I know it's just a picture, but if you look at those two pictures, and I would say, which one do you think eats better, and which one do you think talks better? I'm thinking that everyone's going to say that Eman in September is eating and talking better than Eman in July. So it just goes to show that, I think it was a few times a week that they were working on it, but you can get a lot of good results with it. Here we have some resources here that I wanted to let you guys know about. ASHA, the American Speech Language and Hearing Association. That's our governing body for speech language pathologists. You can get information on dysarthria, feeding issues, motor planning issues there. Feeding Matters is a really good website, especially if your child has a tube feeding. It's a really good parent support group, and then there's a ton of resources as well, even for therapists. TalkTools, obviously. TalkTools.com. That's where you can find all of the books that I was talking about, the different webinars, the courses, and all the tools. Lori Overland, who I spoke a lot about, she is an instructor with TalkTools, and she is the co-author of this book. And So she travels throughout the country and I think the world teaching this, so you should try and find one of her courses. Robin Merkel-Walsh, she is a co-author on this, and she has a lot of good TalkTools courses as well. Melanie Potok is a great resource, especially for parents. She just really focuses on a lot of how do we get kids to enjoy food and be adventurous eaters. This is her book, Raising a Healthy and Happy Eater, and I follow her on Facebook. She has lots of really good tips. Lastly, Diane Barr, who is just a wealth of information. That website that she has, agesandstages.net, is full of research and full of information, especially for any therapists out there. Take a look at her bibliography, what she has done to compile all of that. It helps all of us because we can say, yes, there is research for this, and here's where it is. And she's just put it all into her website. And she has this book, which is awesome. It's called Nobody Ever Told Me or My Mother That. And when I have friends that have premature babies in the NICU, this is the book that I get them. I mean, it just encompasses so many things about speech and about feeding. I can't even go into how helpful that it is for a lot of mothers and fathers with NICU babies and just any kind of feeding disorder in general.
I was just going to say that we have those resources, and I will send out some links and all after in an email to everyone. And we have those resources. We have Melanie's book available on our website, and Diane Barr is actually now one of our instructors, and she does provide one of her best courses, and she's actually going to do this next week in the DC area about feeding and mouth function and development, and yeah, like you said, the blog, and Vanessa is part of that group, that cadre of people who are TalkTools experts. So great resources that she put up here. And we do have a couple of questions, just one question, I think. Oh yeah, 2 questions. Hang on. So we've got, unless you want to finish this up, the slides, and then we can get.
There's just some more. Here's just my references if anyone wants to look into these articles anymore. So.
And we have this. It's part of your handout, and all of this, Vanessa's information, and then those references are also part of that handout that you for download. That was in that handout section on the activity panel. So here's a question from Yvette. Let me open it up a little bit. Oh. Hang on. Move up here. Thank you so much for your time today. This is Yvette. Very much appreciated. I'm an SLP, but I only work with preschool age children for the school system. So I'm not experienced with feeding therapy. My baby, almost 6 months old, was born with Down syndrome. So the feeding is a whole new ball game for us. Hope all goes well with our first spoon feeding tomorrow.
Good. I'll be sending positive thoughts as well. And it's a whole other endeavor if you've never worked with feeding before, but you're going to learn a lot from your kiddo and vice versa.
This is just how do you keep tongue in mouth while using a honey bear straw?
With that, and you don't have to have complete tongue retraction when you do have the honey bear. So a lot of the kids that I work with, with Down syndrome, we have to start it long like this and place it, and if they wrap their tongue around it or have their tongue out like this, it's okay. We're going to work through that, and then we'll end up shortening it down. And once you start the TalkTools straw hierarchy, it is okay to have tongue protrusion, but it's supposed to decrease as you go through the hierarchy. So.
I'm just doing a quick poll on the last poll, and it's just basically to see who is currently working with a speech therapist and or occupational therapists, and just so we kind of get a read of the audience. So just give that a second to roll through, and then we've got a couple. Just one more question. Can everybody hear me okay? I think the poll, okay, looks like everybody can hear me. Vanessa, are you still there?
Yep, I can hear you. Sorry.
Okay. So this is from Elaine. I have a 15-month-old that drinks water a lot with the teddy bear. We're trying to switch them to milk with the teddy, no, I'm sorry, switch the milk to the teddy bear or cutout cup, but spills out. Any recommendation? I think that's what that says.
Okay. And you know, spilling out of the mouth, that's gonna, you know, happen for a little while. I would probably see if you could try straw number 1 in the TalkTools hierarchy and see how that goes. With the straw kit too, which if you obviously finding a speech therapist around you that's trained or trying to attend a course or something to get a better knowledge of this is ideal. And then when you do get the straw hierarchy, the straw kit, it's very detailed in there of, you know, how to go through each straw and the progression of it. So you might want to start doing that. And cup drinking, you know, that is a different motor plan than the straw drinking is. So it will be different. So you'll want to maybe see how your child is doing at spoon feeding, because that will be the most similar to cup drinking.
Okay, so the poll was if you work with an SLP and or, you know, OT or both, and then this is just a comment. We only work with an early interventionist working with our baby at this time. So I guess it's just kind of, it's not really a question, just a comment. A question about the honey bear from Rania. How long should it take before my baby is able to understand how to use this? She's 15 months old.
You know, like I said before, it's really hard to say without me seeing the child, and every child is so different. But I've had kiddos that are around a year old and they figure out the honey bear, and then I have some that are much older until they're able to master that skill, and it just depends on each child's skill set and their sensory issues and their tone issues.
Well, I think we're good. Oh, yep, thank you. Here's a couple. Do you recommend baby-led weaning with Down syndrome child 1 to 2 years?
You know, that's not something that I really have a ton of experience with. I know there's some of the concepts. I know that there's a couple moms that I work with that they kind of follow baby-led weaning, and it's almost, we mix the two concepts together. So I don't think that there is a right or wrong way to do that, and baby-led weaning people have a lot of success with. So.
And just basically, when is the earliest we can start straw drinking? And I guess you probably already answered that. It depends.
Yeah, it depends. And you know, I was with Renee Roy Hill from TalkTools, was teaching a course here in Sioux Falls a few weeks ago, and she was saying how they were starting, that they used to not start teaching with the honey bear until a child was closer to a year, and then all of a sudden there was one child that they were working with and they just decided to give it a whirl at 7 months, and she picked it up. So we start to teach the concept, you know, around that age, and we might not, some kids, they get it right away, and some kids, they don't. So.
And I did want to say, I think most of everything else is just thanking, and people are starting to sign off, and we do thank Vanessa for taking the time to do this. Apparently, you know, we've got great response and a lot of great questions, a lot of interaction, which is wonderful. And I did want to mention we'll put this on the parent video library page as soon as we get the recording converted and all that. Look for it in the next day or so, and I will send an email out with that link, and also a quick survey for you guys to do if you have time. And on that video library page, we did have a parent webinar last month on the sensory system that one of our instructors, Monica Purdy, did that might be relevant to you guys. and I'll provide that link as well. I'm looking to see if there are any questions. We're just getting mostly thank yous and sign-offs. So you have any parting words, Vanessa, before we sign off?
I'm glad that people had a lot of really good questions, and thanks for taking the time to learn just the very tip of the iceberg on all of this. And I want to thank TalkTools for inviting me to do this, because it's been a great experience. So if anyone has questions, you can email me, or you can email TalkTools, obviously, and ask a therapist there. But if you want to find a good TalkTools trained therapist, there is on the website you can locate who the nearest is to you that's been trained.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Vanessa, and we'll follow up, and you'll be seeing her again, I'm sure, in the months to come. Thanks so much, everybody.
Bye.